Well, good morning again. More and more are joining. It's great to see the names coming in there. Almost too fast for me to follow, but brilliant. Come on. Yeah, folks from all over the country, from all parts, and we're delighted to have you. Don't know what it's like for you looking out your windows where you are. Some of you way up north, some of you in the border, some of you even beyond that. But here in Arbroath, where I am situated right now, it's a lovely day. That's one of the advantages I have in living in this fantastic town and in this part of the country, Angus. So if you've got rain and clouds, then hey, deal with it. I've got sunshine and I'm happy for today. So welcome everybody. Loads of names piling in. Just great to see you all. We are so grateful that you've taken this opportunity to be part of our webinar today. 10:59, more folks still joining. Come on in. I want to introduce you to Neil McLennan. If you don't already know Neil, Neil is our technical guru. He will be handling things behind the scenes, as it were. Neil, are you able to tell us how many folks we've got now in the room?
Yes, we're just over 700 so far. So hope everyone's got some fresh air. And I assume you know where the toilets are in your own home.
Yes, absolutely, Neil. Thank you for that. And similarly, as I said, where the coffee pot is or the tap, get yourself water, make yourself perfectly at home as everybody joins us. Come on in. It's great to see the names just piling in. Some, of course, well-kent faces and names. Others I'm not familiar with, but we're delighted to have you either way. We will start at 11 o'clock, which is pretty well now. And folks will still join us and can catch us as soon as they get part of it. Okay, so welcome everybody, or as it was said at the Heart and Soul event on Sunday in the inimitable words of Fishy, welcome everybody, it's good to see you here. And I promise you that's all the singing I'm going to do today. So I got that out of the way nice and early. Even so, I hope you were singing along at home. Welcome everybody. It is good to see you here. Now let me do just one more thing before we get started properly. That was the gong in the assembly hall, or the nearest thing that we've got to it. So as I banged the gong, somebody was supposed to shout, moderator, and you were all supposed to stand to attention. So is that the case? Were you standing in your houses, or hey, not even thinking about it? Well, either way, it's great to have you here. I'm Martin, as of last week, the moderator of the General Assembly of the Church of Scotland, and delighted to be your host for today. Let me introduce you to the panel members who will be presenting and will be open to questions throughout this session. First of all, we have John Chalmers, who is, of course, the convener of the Assembly Trustees. John is in place. We have Dave Kendall, who is our first ever Chief Officer. Dave's probably wondering, why did I take this job? So much has changed since you came on board, but Dave, great to have you with us today. And thirdly, we've got Raymond Young, who is, of course, the chair of the General Trustees. Raymond, resplendent there in his guild tie. He tells me it's pretty well the only tie he's got. So, Raymond, brilliant to have you. Folks, I had a reasonably long reflection plan for today. I have decided that I'm going to put it to the side and simply begin our proceedings with a recitation of the Lord's Prayer. I'm conscious that this is Thy Kingdom Come week, and of course Thy Kingdom Come comes from this prayer. But beyond that, I want to give as much time as I can to the questions and to the business of today. So maybe you'll join with me where you are as we bow our heads and as we say together the words that our Lord gave us together. Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done, on earth as in heaven. Give us today our daily bread. Forgive us our sins as we forgive those who sin against us. Save us from the time of trial and deliver us from evil. For the kingdom, the power and the glory are yours, now and forever. Amen. Well, friends, let me say a few more opening remarks. And first of all, I want to make this absolutely clear. This is today the beginning of a conversation, or should I say a series of conversations. Today is just the start. There is no way on earth we are going to be able to deal with everything today. We don't necessarily have all the right people in the room to deal with all of your questions. You've given countless questions. We would be here for a week getting through just the pre-submitted questions, never mind other ones that may come in. So I'm going to say that you will leave after today somewhat dissatisfied. Your question may not be dealt with. We may not have got to grips with the issue as you would have wanted. I apologise in advance, but I commit to you that as moderator, for me, transparency is important, accountability is important, and I'm going to be looking to host more of these events so that we can have all the conversations that we need to have in these days. So watch this space. We'll have a special one, no doubt, on buildings, because that's an important question for so many. We'll have one with the Principal Clerk and legal questions when we can deal with procedures, not least vacancy procedures, which are important to so many. And we'll pick up themes such as poverty and exclusion and creation care and children and youth. We can't possibly do justice to all today. And so in time, sooner rather than later, watch for more of these webinars to allow us to engage. So friends, finally, if you've asked a question that isn't dealt with, and you've, or if you put your question in today, my commitment to you is that I will get those questions to the right places within the church, and we will endeavour to get every one of them answered in the fullness of time. So with these preliminary remarks over, I'm going to invite John Chalmers, the convener of the Assembly Trustees, to begin the presentations. So John, over to you and onto the stage. Thank you.
Thank you, moderator. Let me begin by reminding everyone of where we were this time last year. The General Assembly unanimously agreed to set up the Assembly Trustees with the clear message to go away and put the Church of Scotland's house in order. There was a long list of priorities: the merger of councils, the appointment of a chief officer, the removal of recurrent budget deficits, £14 million in the last 5 years, a reduction of 20 to 30% in central administrative costs, the establishment of a £25 million growth fund, the creation of 10 to 12 well-resourced presbyteries, and there was much more. And if our Assembly report in its original form had ever seen the light of day, you would have noted the progress that we were making toward delivering on the challenges that we had been set. A faith action plan was being developed, which was already highlighting areas where significant savings could be made, where we could work smarter, and where we could redefine our priorities around the missional challenges that we are facing as a church. The November Commission of Assembly instructed us to specify the remits of the new forums and intimate what parts of the work of the former councils should be stopped. That was never going to be easy. But when we started that work with the forums, it became clear that alteration of the remits alone would not produce the level of savings instructed by the General Assembly. As early as our February meeting with the new forums, we realised that a comprehensive review was needed of the way in which we arrange our priorities and deliver the work that is our central purpose. Lockdown happened before we could complete that work with the forums. At this point, however, reminding everyone that one of our charitable purposes is to promote, in partnership with other churches, the ministry and the mission of the church throughout all of Scotland, with particular reference to its poorest and most remote areas. So whatever may have been said in the newspapers, our commitment to providing financial and resource assistance in areas of special need was and is undiminished. But we were convinced that in other areas of the country, there was much unfinished business where the creation of sustainable congregations, hubs, multidisciplinary teams, fresh expressions, and new church plants were long overdue. As instructed by last year's assembly, we were ready to report that work across the life of the central agencies had to be curtailed. But we knew that that would not be enough to drive the renewal of the church. The creation of new, well-resourced presbyteries and the restructuring of local church around an affordable number of buildings and ministries were crucial. Anything else would be the maintenance of old ways and old structures. We were ready to launch the Growth Fund, Seeds for Change. And we knew that some folk were ready to blaze the trail. In other places, it would be a long, hard road. But a robust planning process, brave enough to grasp nettles which have been left alone for too long, and tough enough to identify exactly where we really needed well-equipped spaces, was, we believed, the long overdue key to a real radical action plan. We were ready to go when COVID-19 came along. Our churches were closed for worship, our traditional organisational life and our familiar presence in communities across Scotland was locked down. And every coordinate against which we had measured our plans for the future changed overnight. We were now playing in a completely different ballpark. But while the economics of our church is a part of what we are wrestling to predict, more importantly is the challenge of trying to understand what the church will look like in a post-pandemic world. What have we learned from our new ways of worshipping, our new ways of meeting, our new ways of caring for the communities we serve? Where do we put Crossreach now in our list of priorities, given the extraordinary burden that the care sector has had to bear? What has changed that cannot and will not ever be the same again? What do we now need to invest in to meet the needs of the new normal that everyone is talking about? We have created, without planning it, new online communities who may not join us when our sacred spaces are reopened for Sunday morning business. How do we go on building these new communities in their virtual sacred spaces? And what of all those under-equipped spaces in the wrong places that we have discovered we don't actually need? The biblical metaphor may be that we have crossed a Red Sea. There's no going back, but we do not want to end up wandering in a wilderness. Indeed, it might be said that we have had our wilderness years, that somehow or another, born on the tide of this grievous virus, is an opportunity not just for the reconstruction of the church, but for the renewal of the church. And now, at the end of our wilderness years, it's a Jordan that we have to cross. There are ways and there are things that we must not go back to when lockdown is no more. As trustees, we have had to recalibrate, but not just for economic reasons. It's much more than that. Priorities have changed. Coronavirus has reminded us of what is really at the heart of the gospel, and that too much of what we are invested in is tradition and custom, some of it peripheral and some of it irrelevant. So for the trustees, it has made the exercise of identifying priorities even more urgent, and it has accelerated the need to implement radical change across the whole church. In a little while, the chairman of the General Trustees, Raymond Young, and I will say a little more about how we hope to move the agenda forward in the next year. But first, you should hear from our Chief Officer, Dave Kendall, who, given all the unpredictable variables, will map out as best he can the ground that we think we are standing on and from which we must plan our way forward. Moderator, can I ask you to introduce our Chief Officer?
Thank you, John. We'll hear more from John shortly, but as he indicates, we're going to hear now from Dave. Dave, I'm delighted to welcome you here today. You are, 6 months into your role? I jokingly said at the beginning, if you knew now what you didn't know then, would you have still taken it? But let me ask you, what have you enjoyed most about coming to work for the Church of Scotland?
It's a fantastic opportunity for me, to be honest, Martin. It's the staff and everybody within the whole church have been so welcoming to me, and it's a very challenging place to work as well. There are so many different facets to the role, so I'm hugely enjoying it. But you're right, I could have done without some of the interruptions to start with.
Absolutely. Well, it's great to have you here today, Dave, and I'm going to invite you now to offer us your presentation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So many thanks for the introduction, Martin, our moderator, and to John for his presentation highlighting the work of the Assembly Trustees and outlining the situation in which we find ourselves. So good morning, everybody. The first thing I would say is that whilst we have a very strong communications team, one of the biggest challenges for any chief officer is how to communicate directly with as many people as possible across the organisation in which you work. The Church of Scotland has a complex setup, and I'm finding it isn't always easy for me to get to everybody. I'm working very hard at it. I'm heartened by the amount of direct interaction and feedback I am getting and my growing network. I'm listening to what you're telling me about the need to up our game, particularly on internal communications across the church. What we're doing today is another huge step towards improving this, alongside many existing initiatives we are progressing, which includes a cross-church intranet, regular targeted communications, weekly blogs to central administrative staff, and team open forums I'm running currently as virtual events. One of my initial goals on arriving was to introduce a set of values within the central admin office that set an expectation of what you will see in all your interactions with us. These agreed values are grace, integrity, respect, professionalism, collaboration, and innovation. Please don't hesitate to get in touch if we don't live up to them or you want to know more. Speaking to you all today gives me the chance to tell you that the central admin office is very much still up and running. While almost all the staff that are still working are doing so from home, we're striving to continue to provide the continuation of all essential services to the church. Last week, we published a new contact list in case you can't get hold of the staff member you normally interact with. If you want the detail of who is actually working at any given time, we can provide that too. In my role, I report directly to the Assembly Trustees and work in very close collaboration with the Principal Clerk, George White, and David Robertson, who leads in the General Trustees area. Within the Central Admin Office, we have the following functions, all of which are very much still open for business. The two recently introduced forums which drive the work of our church, that's Faith Nurture, with the goal of not so much business as usual, but mission as usual, reaching out, growing, serving, inspiring. And Faith Impact, where their vision is to participate effectively in the mission of God in our congregations, communities, and world, following the example and priorities of Jesus Christ in seeking life in fullness for all God's people. Then we have our highly professional service departments: finance and stewardship, human resources, legal services, communications, information technology, and estates. There's much that I would love to talk about today in terms of what we're doing across all these areas to achieve our contribution to the vision of the Church of Scotland through the still developing Faith Action Plan. We are also focused on the need for greater management oversight, support and development of the staff, tighter control over budgets and expenditure, and of course the implementation of the strategic aims of the trustee body. These goals arose from the Special Commission on Structural Reform, which was agreed and adopted unanimously at the General Assembly in 2019. Today, my focus is on financial modelling that we've been doing in the light of the very significant loss of income that could result from the COVID-19 crisis, which of course led to the subsequent nationwide lockdown, closure of our churches, halls, offices, and the impact all of this has on the accounts of the church. I know all too well that we cannot simply focus on the money within the church, with so much important work for us to do. But the situation we face demands our immediate attention. Firstly, at all times through this crisis, we need to try to maintain our focus on the fact that this is a significant moment for the church, and we will never have a better opportunity to embrace change and make a huge difference. The headline unmitigated figures in the Assembly Trustees report do look serious, with a potential 20 to 30% drop in income. However, if we take the necessary actions at all levels in the church, we can and will come through this year in good shape for the future, though I'm sure that we will certainly need to lean into our reserves. The overview of the financial situation focuses on three areas: congregational income, impact of income shortfall on the budget of the central administration, and the impact on reserves of unincorporated entities. Firstly, congregational income. Offerings, tax recovered and hall lets, termed as income from outside organisations in the accounts, are not surprisingly dominant when something like 80% of the income coming from these three areas. In 2018, the total congregational income equated to £86.9 million. 40.3 million of this income was retained locally, and 46.6 million was provided towards the national costs in that year. While that may seem a large contribution to national costs, approximately 40 million is required just to pay for ministries' costs, including stipends. Modelling has been carried out to look at the potential impact of COVID-19 on the annual congregational income numbers. The assumptions that go into the modelling can be debated, and it certainly isn't an exact science, but what this shows us is that the church will have a shortfall in income in 2020 compared to previous years. The scenario in each individual congregation will be different, but through analysis, the possible loss over 6 months from the start of the lockdown could be very significant. 20 to 30% loss of income figures that you will have seen quoted sounds very large, but we are aware that many efforts are being made to mitigate this loss. However, even if we are very successful in these aims, the loss is still going to be significant when compared to a normal year. And the situation is further exacerbated by the fact that it isn't just in the areas of offerings, tax and hall lets that we are losing income. It is expected that everything from contributions from our organisations, fundraisers, investments to interest will also be impacted. What would a loss at this level mean for the church? Potential reduction to ministries and mission contributions where a congregation cannot meet its obligations? Though we know that there are huge efforts being made to maintain this income. Local churches having to lean on existing reserves, where the additional efforts cannot make up the difference in income. Innovations in methods of collection of congregational giving and fundraising to help bridge the gap. I'm hearing more and more positive stories in these areas. We need to learn from each other and share best practices. Long-term thinking. We don't know how long we will have to live with some level of operational constraint. So maybe reduced income is here to stay to some extent, at least until 2021. Our forecasting and future fundraising endeavours need to take this into account. And at a local level, we need to focus on people and building resources where they are most needed, including strategic consideration of linkages, unions and dissolutions of congregations, sale of buildings, and the potential for subsequent reductions in ministry and MDS posts. With these revised congregational income forecasts, we can now model what the impact of the losses in congregational income might mean to the national budget. It is anticipated that the reduction on congregational income would have some impact on the amount of money transferred through the ministry and mission to support expenditure on areas such as ministry stipends, staff salaries, and missional work at home and abroad. There are also further losses at national level from reductions in income from areas such as central investments, legacies, property disposals, events, publications, and charitable giving, which are all impacted by COVID-19, at least in the short term. The impact of such a cumulative loss would be that the 2020 income may not be adequate to fully pay the ministry costs, staff salaries, and missional costs. Whilst we've discussed a range of possible mitigations, they are highly unlikely to be able to fully bridge this sort of gap. In addition, what we cannot forget is that we have been running with a deficit in each of the last 5 years, which we have met from our reserves. Since I arrived in November last year, we've been plotting a path to remove the deficit and start on the task of reducing the administrative costs by 25%. I am confident that we would have made real inroads into this task in 2020, and we're on target to meet the initial goals in the first 3 months of the year. However, like many of the targets in the Radical Action Plan, the changes we need to make to our financial model in the post-COVID-19 world are much more challenging than those that we faced before. The outcome of all of this is that we will all need to play our part in mitigating this situation as far as possible by minimizing our costs whilst pulling on our reserves. This will require very tight control of our cash flow whilst maximizing any other form of income available to us. For example, in the Central Administrative Office, our decision to furlough staff was not an easy one to take, but was a very valid one. Many of the administrative staff couldn't really do their jobs effectively in the lockdown scenario, or because they had to work from home when their work was dependent on being in the office. In addition, the volume of work has fallen markedly in some areas over the last couple of months. As a result, we have focused our attention on high priority work and utilised furlough in just the same way as other charities and businesses as an enabler to protect jobs. The impact on our national reserves is potentially significant if we take account of the investment losses as well as the direct impact of COVID-19 on both the church and Crossreach, where there have been additional costs. Whilst we've seen growth in national reserves over the past few years, we are anticipating a dip in 2020. In conclusion, there are a number of key issues to be addressed. All possible steps need to be taken to maximise the church's income, maintain M&M payments, and minimise our costs in 2020. This includes reducing the cost of the central administration by 25%, as instructed by GA19, and accelerating our approach to moving faster and further towards investing in the local. It is worth noting that contrary to newspaper reports, our current plans to reduce costs in the National Office do not include any compulsory redundancies, though we have been developing a voluntary exit scheme which we hope to launch soon. The goals of the Radical Action Plan, with all that it means for the need to ensure we move swiftly towards having the right spaces in the right places, remain relevant. However, the task that faces us now is many times greater, with the result that all our critical change activities have to become part of the operational plan, not an add-on. The Radical Action Plan will live on, but needs to be expanded and delivered as part of normal church business. The growth of the church has to be at the heart of the operational plan, and for the time being, what might have been the growth fund monies need to be built into the budget to support key enablers such as presbytery reform, fresh expressions, and the building of strong local congregations. I want to remind you again that we remain open for business in the National Office and that we have a hard-working team of highly professional staff who are able to help you with all of the challenges you are facing in your congregations just now. That might be looking at what you can and can't do in your halls and church buildings in the current emergency. It might be helping you to reorganise old trust funds you hold so they can be put to better use in a modern context and help your financial situation. It might be giving you advice on the employment of staff. It might be helping you to carry out risk assessments for things you want to do. It might be support with your communications. It might be providing you with the IT backup and advice. It might be helping you to navigate the thickets of Zoom so you can use it safely and securely. It might be advising you on how to hold trustee meetings during lockdown, or it might be advice to treasurers on how to go about maximising income in these difficult days. We are here to help you and are absolutely committed to that task. Whilst I've not really touched on the great work being carried out by Viv Dickinson and the team at Crossreach as part of today's presentation, this has to be seen as a real good news story in terms of our national impact. As I noted in my contribution at last weekend's Heart and Soul, I have nothing but admiration for the fantastic work they're doing in our care homes and in the community. This Christian love, care and dedication is the Church of Scotland at its best, and at this time it is a cause that needs additional support. Finally, we should not let the tragedy of COVID-19 define our future. What we need to do is use it as a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to engineer the change we have needed for many years. Through this, we can become the leading, flexible, agile, responsive church that we yearn to be, proactively releasing the energy, innovation, and creativity of those who have answered the call to follow Jesus. Thank you, Martin, and back to you.
Dave, thank you so much for your presentation, and we'll hear much from you later as the day goes on. Folks, let me just make a couple of points. First of all, this is new to us, this particular piece of technology. And if you find you're frozen at some point, please go out and come back in again. That's probably the best solution. We lost John Chalmers, convener of the trustees, Assembly Trustees, a little minute ago, but John's back with us. We're going to get used to the technology as we go. And also in terms of the technology, I mean, I've been noticing a fascinating debate around John's metaphor of the Jordan. Christopher Rose suggesting the Jordan speaks of a movement from death to life. John Pickles extending that a little further by saying, yes, but we have to face giants on the far side. Now, it's also clear that some of you are distracted hugely by that and you don't want to see that chat. Just shows how different we all are. Some want to engage, some just want to listen. It's okay, we can do both. If you don't want to see the chat and what's going on, just go up above your video screen, top right-hand corner, there's a small right-hand arrow that says hide sidebar. Do that and you won't be put off if that's a problem for you. Others of you, please do engage as you want to. So, John, I'm going to go back to you. John Chalmers, convener of the trustees. Following that, we'll hear from Raymond Young, chair of the general trustees. John, back to you now. Thank you.
Thank you, moderator. I'm glad I got back in. As those of you who are tuning in today are well aware, this trustee body was set up to bring prudence and responsibility to the way we manage the affairs of the church. And we were looking forward to a consultative General Assembly in which we would have explained our unfolding plans. Instead, the trustees now must manage a situation for which there is no precedent. Frankly, now, like no time ever before, we need the prayers, the support, and the trust of the wider church to help us navigate some of the most difficult terrain we have ever faced. For now, there are three main areas that we have identified as being of particular importance. The first is the need to closely monitor the financial and economic effect that COVID-19 is having on the church. As more information becomes available, the financial model will change. But for the time being, the modelling that we have done has meant that a huge amount of work to establish a growth fund has had to be set aside for the time being. This may change as the months go by, but as trustees, we are responsible for monitoring the risks. And we believe that investment in the Faith Action Plan, which includes the core work of supporting ministries and mission, will have to have first call on the reserves, which would otherwise have gone into the growth fund. We are also examining every item of expenditure, from the cost of the General Assembly to the cost of international travel, examining the level of our reserves and the uses to which they can be put, so that the trustees, alongside the new forums, can build the church's priorities around the criteria set out in section 5 of our report. And here again, I must correct a very wrong impression published in this week's Times. The character of the Church of Scotland, as our report says, is one which has never been inward-looking. And anyone who knows me personally will know that I could not support being part of a church which was so heavenly minded that it was no earthly use. The wording of our report may be a little clumsy. It pertains to the emergency situation we find ourselves in. But the trustees do believe that in the rebuilding of our church, there needs to be a clear fusion of the 5 marks of mission in the work we do and in the way we do it. There is nothing that we currently do which is not worthy. But the General Assembly asked us to set out the basis on which tough choices have to be made. We have tried to do that, and we simply hope that the wider church can trust us to get the balance right, so that when we come out of this critical time, we will be a stronger church, more able than ever before to support the weakest and most marginalised. Secondly, we are looking at the need to invest in the area of information technology and communications. We need to create a coordinated strategy to communicate effectively across the church and externally. And this will include consideration of what we expect from our website, from Life and Work, and from each of the outward-facing agencies of the church. Dave has already mentioned the need for an intranet, where all of us in the church can readily access the support and advice that we need. But then there is the exciting challenge of building on the imaginative work that has been done by ministers and congregations who are keeping worship and fellowship alive in these unprecedented times. There is evidence that during lockdown, we have extended the reach of the church and built up online communities that are here to stay. And this raises a number of questions. What are the best platforms to be using for this work? What investment, training, and support is needed for us to sustain this work? And how do we make use of these platforms to engage with a wide range of audiences, especially children and young people? How do we release the creativity and talent that is required in order to produce week by week watchable and insightful material that speaks to the generations who might be engaging with the church for the first time in their life? How do we anchor the world of those online communities in the life of strong, sustainable congregational settings? These are big questions about the shape of the post-lockdown church. And we are ready to put budget aside, most likely from our reserves, for this vital work. And finally, there is the need to revitalise presbytery planning. Had there been a General Assembly, we would have asked the Assembly to instruct a new round of robust presbytery planning, which together with the General Trustees programme for providing well-equipped spaces in the right places, would lead to a church dependent on fewer but well-equipped and resourced buildings. There can and will be no withdrawing of support from areas of special need. But we must create an optimum number of self-supporting congregations based around fewer buildings and an affordable number of ministries. This is not forced on us by COVID-19. This is fundamental to how we operate as a church in the future. So the innovative stuff that we can and will do in many places will be conditional on a new round of presbytery planning, which leads to a transfer of funding from unsustainable, unnecessary ministries and buildings to be invested in fresh expressions of church life. Even without a General Assembly to issue an instruction, we believe that there are enough presbyteries willing to take the initiative in this vital area. And we believe that there is enough flexibility in the present structures to create multidisciplinary team ministries, to house associates in church manses, to allow ministers to put their tenure at the disposal of a presbytery without losing their security, to make it a bit more secure for some ministers who otherwise feel they have been forced to go beyond their planned retirement age to retire. There are all sorts of adventures in new forms of ministry that are possible by running pilot schemes. And we are ready to build into the operational plan funding for those who want to put in place the building blocks of a new shape of church. Moderator, none of this is simple, but it is exciting to think that on the other side of this pandemic is an opportunity to reframe and reshape the Church of Scotland. However, we can only do this in close conjunction with the General Trustees. So we need now to hear about the plans for the Well-Equipped Spaces programme. Thank you.
Thank you again, John. Let me just again interact with the webinar for a moment and to remind folks that as well as the chat sidebar, which many are using, there is one that allows you to ask questions. So for example, Robin Hill has asked, is there going to be a Commission of Assembly later this year? Jonathan Fleming, Largs and Cumbria, Jonathan's asked, given the requirement for social distancing that's going to be continuing for some time, will there be an accelerated means of pew removal and so on? So questions are coming in. Folks, there's no way I can handle all of them today, but I'm just letting you know we're aware of them, we're seeing them, and we're noting the questions. Thank you so much for them. Now, Raymond Young, Chair of the General Trustees. You've been waiting patiently, Raymond, in the wings, as it were. Now is your moment. Step forward, Raymond. We're delighted to have you here today. Thank you.
Thanks, moderator, and it's very nice to be here. John talks about this pandemic as an opportunity to reframe and reshape the church. Jesus uses the image of pruning the vine to achieve growth and more abundant fruit, removing dead and duplicate branches. It's the image I would have presented to this year's assembly after our consultation last autumn. Many thanks to all those who took part. 1,300 responses, over 1,000 at meetings and our webinar. Your responses, which were very positive, were published earlier this year. And our recommendations should have been discussed at the Assembly, but like others, COVID-19 has overtaken our original timetable. But in partnership with the Assembly trustees, we hope to be able to move forward faster and deliver the changes that we all think are needed. Pruning is needed. A quick reminder, there's never been a strategic approach to the church's buildings. It's one of the big elephants in the room. Sometimes one wonders whether our buildings are more important than what we do within them. Many are poorly equipped, unwelcoming, in the wrong place, and thanks to previous schisms, there are often too many in one town or area. We cling to them as if we are scared to move on, which we might be. Digital worship, new communities, new people. Do our buildings give the church an image of people of growth, of welcome, of tomorrow? The General Trustees is a separate charity from the Assembly Trustees. We own, on behalf of the church, most of the church's estate. So that's why we've been developing a plan called Well-Equipped Spaces in the Right Places, designed to help local congregations focus on worship, mission, and discipleship building, to look at growth and to live out the gospel. But, and it's a big but, we help congregations by working with and supporting presbyteries and their planning role. The current legislation framework makes presbyteries responsible for pruning and the hard decisions about buildings. not the General Trustees. What we can do is to support presbyteries as they make these decisions, and that's our current focus. Primarily, we believe that without strong and properly professionally resourced presbyteries, any proposals for change cannot be achieved. So while we welcome presbytery reform, it needs to go further to ensure that each presbytery has the professional skills and experience available to it. We are exploring, with a group of presbyteries in the Northeast, a pilot appointment of a full-time buildings officer who can support both the planning process and local congregations with their management of buildings. COVID-19 has reinforced the significant challenge facing the church. In this environment, there can no longer be the assumption that any particular building can survive without a critical assessment of its contribution to the mission of the church. A key question in a presbytery plan has to be, is this building really necessary? And this should be asked irrespective of the congregation's financial position or the building's historical importance. Buildings and land are simply a means by which the mission of the church can be achieved. So what specifically are we doing to support presbytery planning? We've been testing out ideas with a number of presbyteries like Shetland, Aberdeen and St Andrews as they prepare new plans. The lessons from these will help in producing a toolkit for presbyteries to use when making their assessment about land and buildings in relation to the presbytery's mission plan, sitting alongside the human, financial and digital resources to deliver that mission plan. 4 key things we're doing. 1, setting minimum standards for existing churches and new planting. What should a well-equipped space look like? Inclusiveness, access, welcome, hospitality, facilities, ecology. Secondly, advice on location. Where may church plant, old and new, be required for the next 10 to 15 years? What's the impact of local development plans on our thinking? What about the duplication of churches, both ours and other denominations, and the issue of long-term sustainability? Thirdly, how do we manage surplus buildings? Can we unburden the local congregation of responsibility for managing and disposing of them? Will this help congregations focus on mission? Should Kirk sessions rather than congregations have the last word? How do we deal with those historical buildings? Could sales receipts be shared between congregations? Finally, we're looking at new procedures for approvals, grants and loans for work to individual buildings. How does that building fit into the presbytery plan? Has there been a full assessment of the need for the building by the presbytery? Just because the congregation has money, should the work go ahead? How well is it used? What about its relationship with local church review? Is there a financial plan, sustainability, partnership potential? Developing and implementing an estate plan is urgent. It cannot be put off. The church spends too much time and money on buildings. New ways of doing church, including online, will also add to the need for rationalization, involving reducing the number of buildings while creating opportunities for church planting and while making sure that the resulting estate is fit for purpose. Most of the proposals set out in our consultation were strongly supported. Because of the urgency, we can't wait for the next General Assembly. There will be proposals then that will require legislative approval in 2021. And in the meantime, we continue to support congregations with advice on health and safety issues and the day-to-day management of buildings while they are not open to the public. But our long-term message is simple. If this church wants growth, it needs to prune its land and buildings estate. And the presbytery planning is the key. Martin, thank you.
Raymond, thank you very much for your presentation. Folks, there are lots of ways to interact today. Raymond, of course, as chair of the trustees, was speaking about buildings. If you look to your sidebar, there's an option polls. You've got chat and then questions and then polls. So right now we're going to open a poll. It doesn't require a great in-depth thought from you really today. It's as much as anything just a snapshot in time. So if you click on polls, you'll see one there that we'll ask for an answer to. How do you respond in terms of buildings? I can't wait to get back in as soon as possible. Or I'm happy to wait until everyone can come back under more normal conditions. Or the third option, beginning to envisage church without the need for buildings. Which of those three would you tick for our little snapshot poll? Okay, folks, let's dig in now to some of the questions we've heard from each of the presenters. I'm going to start with this topic that I might just dub as the 5 marks of mission, or Timesgate, as some may be calling it now. Many people have submitted questions in advance around this subject, and I've noticed in the chat people have been talking about it just the same. Let me summarise 2 or 3 of the comments and questions that have been asked. Anne Winning, for example, says, surely all 5 of the marks are inextricably interwoven. We can't prioritise 2 or 3 over and against the others. Jenny Adams up in Murray says, these are not optional extras. She's talking about our commitment to global crisis and to biodiversity, climate emergency. She says it's integral to all of Christian life. Rolf Billis, he asks, can the Assembly trustees endorse the Church's historical commitment to serve those who are most in need and therefore reaffirm the gospel imperative for the whole Church to give priority to serving the poorest and most marginalised people in our society? Doug Gay goes even further. He asks, will the trustees consider withdrawing that section of their update and working with the Theological Forum on a way of expressing our commitment to the 5 marks of mission, which expresses the mind of the Kirk? Well, that's just a flavour of lots of contributions that were made on this subject. John, I'm going to give you first bite at this. You referred to it in your presentation, but I think it's important enough that I want to come back to you and allow you to clarify further.
Absolutely, yeah. I can understand the heated exchange about this one. We describe it in our original report as a yardstick. We didn't describe it as the final way in which we might set our priorities. But of course, the report that's now before you is an evolution from our Assembly report to a report which was trying also to describe our situation during this emergency. So there is a clumsiness in the report, and I'm quite willing to admit that. Firstly, we are in an emergency situation at the moment, and that is what prompted us to be a little more prescriptive about the marks of mission than was stated in our original report. We furloughed the majority of our staff, and we've said that during this lockdown we were providing only essential services, and something of that was in the background when we expressed our prescription, as it were, on the first 3 marks of mission. But secondly, I have to say, I think our original report certainly said much, and even this report says a lot about the character and the standards of the Church of Scotland, that we are not inward looking. Indeed, our charitable purposes state quite clearly and categorically our commitment to the poorest, and that doesn't change. Our gold standard is to do work that demonstrates a fusion of the marks of mission. especially bringing together proclamation and practice. And I can't imagine anyone wanting to demur from that. I think our original report tried to express it rather better. But an idea was around, I think you mentioned at one point to me that we might work with the Theological Forum to bring some greater clarity to that definition or that yardstick. I'd be happy to do that. And then thirdly, I've just add this. We would be kidding ourselves if we didn't acknowledge that there's an issue here that has always divided opinion within the church. And the trustees are the ones who hear both sides of the argument. Suffice it to say that we have been challenged on more than one occasion that funds of the church may have been spent on wholly laudable purposes, but not wholly as our charitable purposes might define it. And that's why there has to be something in everything that we do that allows us to break cover as Christians and say as clearly as anything that we're involved because it's our calling. But do not get the idea that we will be retreating from speaking truth to power, giving a voice to the voiceless, abandoning our priority to the poor. Indeed, the whole thrust of our intention is to become a stronger, growing church that can do and be more than it is. And the bottom line is that we will continue, even although that's difficult, we'll continue to do that. And my feeling is this: it will continue to be really difficult unless we make the big changes that we need to make in the way we are configured in our parish life across the country.
Let me just say to everyone present in the webinar a wee reminder that we are recording today so that others can watch this back afterwards who couldn't be present, and all of the chats and comments recorded too, so that these can be shown to the presenter. There's no way John could be talking there and seeing what everybody was saying, but the comments and the chat will be available so we can pick up on it. Listen, we could spend the whole of the session on this one topic, and I'm sure the conversation will go on, but there's more to talk about. I thank you, John, for what you've said right now. Radical Plan, Robert Allen, who of course was, well, to the fore in bringing it forward to recent assemblies, Robert from Falkirk, he's really asking, where is that plan now? Is it radical still? Has it been put on the shelf or tucked under the bed? I think what he's asking is, and others have asked the same in different words, is the plan still the plan? Is radical still the watchword for this day? Dave, I'm going to come to you if you would respond to this one, please. Where's the radical plan? Have we still got a hold of it?
Certainly, we do still have a hold of it, Martin. It's still one of the fundamental projects that we're running from the centre. But I think you said, is it radical enough is the question, I think, and the answer to that is it's not radical enough now. But all of the strands of the plan will be included in our operational plan going forward. We've actually mapped the whole of the original plan across to the new plan that we're developing, and it will all be there. So things like focus on finances, focus on under 40s, focusing on young presbytery planning, all these things are all there. The smaller number of presbyteries, even the growth fund elements, we're capturing them and reading them across. So when we go back to General Assembly next year, we'll be able to report on it, but it'll be part of the overall plan. But it isn't radical enough. The scenarios around the finance in other areas are much more significant than they were when the plan was written. So we're having to expand the plan to take that into account. But I can tell you it's living. We'll have a meeting of it next week. We have regular project meetings. We're turning it into very much a set of deliverables so we can see that we're making progress with it. So absolutely alive, but not radical enough to actually achieve the endpoint anymore.
So not radical enough is Dave's response to that, but they're absolutely still working on it. Now, I was going to introduce a section on buildings. Like it or lump it, folks are interested. It's been a big topic in the chat and in the pre-submitted questions. But Raymond from General Trustees is dropped out. Technical hitch right now, so I'll hold that till he comes back, and I'm going to go on and ask a question that really relates to mission and planting and pioneering. It comes from Neil Irvin, from Neil Urquhart from Irvin and Kilmarnock Presbytery. Neil says that they were ready to go with all the raft of pioneering proposals well worked out, but that there was a dependence on the Seeds for Change, the new growth fund coming into being. And Neil, I know that others around the country are dismayed to hear that that fund is at best on hold. What kind of reassurances can we offer folks that the whole business of pioneering, that out there on the edge stuff, is still going to be part of what we're about, and that we're going to resource it? Dave, do you want to start on that? And maybe John, you want to contribute to that as well?
The way I'd start talking about that is the sort of areas you're talking as a question are the things that should be the things we bed into the operational plan to start with. So funding things like the new 12 presbyteries and the things that people want to do on the ground should be the things we look at very first. So I would hate to think people thought we were going to lose all of that, but there'll also be some need to think about how we do that locally and how we actually devolve some of the work from the centre to the local churches to allow that to happen. So we're not losing that. I'm setting up something to continue with the ethos of the Growth Fund, at least in terms of an R&D function, which I think was raised at last year's General Assembly, to allow us, if you like, to look at those areas and think about how we can support them and look at what funding requirements there are. But the idea that we could have a £25 million pot in this current scenario, that just isn't a realistic one anymore. But we can utilise our existing funding in a different way, I think, to help with that. I'm sure John will have some opinions around that too.
Just to reinforce what I tried to say in my introduction, and that is that I think a good number of these innovative ideas that were around need to become part of presbytery plans. I think the challenge to Irvine and Kilmarnock and any other presbytery is to look across the presbytery and ask itself, where if we were reshaping the church, could we make significant savings that could be invested in the new shape of church that we need to take this place forward? All of these MDS posts were part of a presbytery plan, and some of the ones that were envisaged as a result of the Growth Fund. What we're saying just now, while we're tackling this emergency situation, is that we're willing to help presbyteries do the hard work of reshaping their plans to accommodate within the main budget these innovative ideas, but they come at the expense of changing the way we work in other places.
Thank you, John. Again, a subject which we could probably spend the whole of the day. We've touched on it, we've begun a conversation, and there is more to come. We've got Raymond back in. Raymond, just to give you a heads up, I will come to you very shortly about buildings, but just to give you a minute to get yourself sorted again, I want to pick up a question that's come in from Tara Shannon. Tara is part of COSI Fife, COSI being Church of Scotland Youth. I think if I'm right, Tara was part of NYA. I'm not going to try and paraphrase her question. I'm going to read it out exactly as she has put it. She refers to the report. Section 5.3.5 says, to strive to safeguard the integrity of creation and sustain and renew the life of the earth. How can the church possibly say that we are striving for the integrity of creation when we're still invested in fossil fuels? She goes on, young people have expressed a desire for the church to divest. Is there a plan to disinvest when it is ethically and morally wrong and it is hurting God's creation and hurting the poorest people on the planet? Well, there you go. Tara's question, very clear and stated very strongly. No doubt it will create lots of traffic in our chat box. John, let me come to you. I'm not sure where you will go with that today, but let's be sure we are hearing this plea from folk.
Where I think we should go with this from today is that perhaps it might be the subject of one of our webinars to come, certainly a part of a webinar to come. The way in which the church's funds are invested is a matter for the Investors' Trust. And of course, it was a hot subject at last year's assembly, and it would have been again this year. I understand that a good deal of the holdings of the church in the carbon-related industries have been disposed of, but I also understand that the trustees of the trust, the Investors' Trust, disposed of them for commercial, financial, economic reasons rather than for the moral reasons that so many people are calling for. And I know that in March, before lockdown, it was one of the difficult conversations that the trustees were going to set up between the Faith Impact Forum and the Investors Trust, in the hope that we could have come to the General Assembly with some clarity on this issue. We didn't get that far, unfortunately, before lockdown, but it's a conversation that must go on.
Thank you, John, and thank you, Tara, for the question. It's clear in the chat that many people are saying amen to your question. Young people at General Assembly have always spoken with power and conviction, and we're glad that your voice was able to be in our webinar today. So I'm going to bring Raymond back now. Raymond, a whole slew of questions about buildings and so on, some of them very precise to particular congregations and very pertinent to presbyteries here and there. Those questions will be passed on to you, but many of them, I think, are more general in nature. Ewan up in Gordon Presbytery says, should we be sensing a threat to many of our rural buildings, which are perhaps not best placed and are not easy to transform into community hubs and so on? Here we have a question here. Will this lead to an acceleration of the Well-Equipped Spaces programme? Many other folks. Emma says, let's reduce now drastically the number of church buildings we have. I could go on and on. Marion McIntyre, National Convener of the Guild. How seriously is the Church of Scotland taking the need to rid itself of old, unmanageable churches, which are a drain on cash we simply do not have? But before you answer, let me give this from Malcolm Kinnear, maybe at the other side of the coin. He asks this: will you acknowledge the pain felt by people who are missing the normal social interaction and the ability to come to buildings? Will you reaffirm the importance of dedicated worship spaces? And finally he asks, will you continue to negotiate, not necessarily you personally, but the Church, with the Scottish Government to facilitate a speedy return to our buildings? So much about buildings, Raymond. A lot for you to answer in one go, but go on, do your best.
Right, where do I start? First of all, sorry about the technology, and I think this actually is an example of what's going to happen for a number of rural communities. I live in a rural community, and the broadband crashes from time to time, and it's done so this morning. So apologies for that. But it does indicate that for me, the continuing importance of people being able to meet together face to face. And yes, we will continue to need to have places where people meet together. Are they always, though, ones that we own as a special dedicated space? And I think that's a question for rural areas. And I know the conversations with a number of presbyteries that the issue about looking at local communities and seeing that community halls, community facilities are being denied or closing. Where does the church fit into that? There are conversations going on about rural hubs, which involve other organisations as well. And I think that in a rural context is something we've got to explore, and presbyteries have to explore. I get the feeling, and I accept it, and I understand it, of people being impatient about the speed with which we can get rid of buildings which are no longer of any use. But we do have procedures that we have to go through, and that's what I was saying about the presbyteries being the key in this whole exercise. If the presbyteries can start to take up the issue, and I know it's difficult for them. I know sometimes it must feel like turkeys voting for Christmas, because we all have an emotional attachment to buildings, whether it's our own home or our old school or anything. But we have to move on, and we need to find new ways, not just of being church, but new places to be church. And the congregations, there's a number of congregations that have taken the step very recently of saying, no, the old building, the old arrangements we have no longer works. Let's see other ways. And I know of congregations that said, yes, we actually need to not worship any longer in our own dedicated building, but worship in the village hall, and those kind of issues. But at the end of the day, what we need is presbyteries to grasp this nettle and to move on. And that's why we're going to try and help them.
Thank you, Raymond. I could just jump across very quickly to a question that came in from Alistair, who's involved with Presbytery Property in Glasgow. He accepts that presbyteries have that responsibility, but he says so often their hands are tied when congregations are unwilling to come to the table. He talks about tenure as being a huge restriction on that, and I don't know if we'll have time for tenure to talk about tenure or not today, but it's definitely there somewhere in the background. Dave, I'm going to come to you with some of the big financial questions that people have asked, but just as a way into that, we've heard talk this morning about technology and the need for us to embrace it and to be better at it. Given what you've described, even in your opening remarks about our financial situation, where are the funds going to come from to properly resource the technologies that the church needs right now? I'm talking about a national level and then cascading down to congregations.
Oh, that's a really good question to start with. And actually, I'm not too concerned about that, Martin, because what we need to do is prioritise the areas that we put the money. I've talked to the Assembly trustees about having to have investment at this time. I think I've seen a few things on the chat line about this as well. We need to invest in some really key areas, even during these difficult periods, so that we're fit for the future. IT is one in particular area that I think I'm very passionate about doing more on, and I've talked to a lot of the people around the church about the need for something much better. And we've got the capability to do it, so we just need to ensure that we put some funds aside for that. That's my answer to that.
Yeah, no, that's great. Hey, listen, brief answers work every time. But I think I want to speak on behalf of the church that congregations are finding their way in. Some are already there. For some, this has been a really steep learning curve to get to grips with the technology required to allow congregations to engage beyond themselves. And I think there's a cry that that work needs to be properly resourced as we go forward. In other words, that even when back in our buildings, the online presence is vital to our future and will need to be properly resourced. Dave, let me keep you right there. I'm going to ask some questions. Now, you can pass to others if more appropriate, but I'll at least start with you. And various people have asked about M&M. Mary Stoble, for example, Kincardine, Croyk and Edgerton, she asks, she points out that many congregations, particularly smaller churches, are already struggling financially and have been badly hit by the closures. And she says this: what is being done about M&M contributions as we go forward? Norman Afrin in Glasgow, is there any thought about lowering M&M contributions as congregations see a big decline in weekly offerings? David Alexander, is it possible to have some idea of consideration being given to M&M calculations? Again, I think he's asking the same thing. What's happening about M&M? Of course, there was already a big discussion about it, but right now, in the light of the crisis, can you update us at all where we are with M&M?
Okay, so the first thing to say is we've got the M&M review group, which has been working towards recommending a new system. I think most people will know that. That needs to take account of our changed circumstances. It's reconvening next week to look at it. There'd already been some proposals up to the Assembly trustees in terms of interim. COVID-19's changed things a bit, so it has to move forward. I think everybody in the call will also know from 2021, we won't be able to increase the contributions of any congregation because that was a GA 2019 deliverance. We're looking at ways of adjusting contributions. Absolutely, we are, as part of this M&M review group. But also we need to say all of this is dependent on us reducing the amount that we spend. So if we're going to reduce the amount that comes in, we have to look at how we actually reduce the amount of money that goes out. So that marries up. For 2020, which I think is the critical period for most people here today, we know that the congregations may have access to some reserves, but not everybody will have that. We know some congregations are actually managing to maintain their income, and we know some are not. The first port of call is for them to talk to their presbyteries about this and say they've got an issue. We're more than happy to help as well. We've asked for that. We've got indications from a number of presbyteries that are really struggling with it. Our finance team want to help with that as well. but it is, we're not pretending for a minute that this isn't a challenging period, but it is a very mixed amount, that some are doing really well in managing to maintain, others not so much. And we understand that they're all different. So we have to work with the presbyteries and with the centre to try and help with that. That would be my starting gambit on it.
Stuart Guy, way up in the northwest there, he's asking, can you offer us some sort of background to where the figures have come from? For example, the estimated reduction in congregational income of 30 million, the reduction of M&M 20 million, and so on. Brian Kerr from Lanark, he asks, look, do we have a concrete report that leads us to these numbers, or are these essentially guesstimates? Dave.
Right, over. That's a good one for me as well. So let's be honest about the £30 million figure to start with. It's very much a bounding figure. It assumes significant unmitigated losses. We've talked about lots of things people are doing to mitigate the losses. From a 58 million offerings and 11.8 million tax recovered. So they're the starting point for looking at that. It looks at where the standing orders are, which we assume will continue to come in, but where we're getting losses where the money's taken from somewhere else. So it also takes account of other income. So let me give an example of a big figure that we've got. We bring in something like £7 million from hall lets as an example. That's a very big figure, and we all know around the whole of the country at the minute we're not bringing in money around hall lets. So the assumption there is that we will not get those monies, and our investments and the interest rates, etc., those monies are going to be less than they were in previous years. So I think the question was, is this pulled together in a report? I've got a spreadsheet with it on, and the finance team have worked hard on trying to do the best here, but I think I said in my presentation, it isn't an exact science. Each line is an estimate based on what we think the scenario looks like, but it's not unrealistic to be saying that, you know, even with the mitigations we're going to take on board, we will be a long way away from what we would normally take in. And I think some of the questions that you've had around churches that are really struggling, I can understand that will be the case. My own personal church relies a lot on hall lets as an example, and I know that's a scenario that many will be facing. Other things like fundraisers, I know people are trying to replace some of them. Weddings, we're not seeing weddings this year. The other bit of the scenario I think I would say to you is we've looked at things like potential impact, probability, and mitigation. So overall, we can take if you like, a view over where we might end up. So the 30 million is very much out there. What we don't want that to be is a number that discourages people, because actually we'll do so much better than that. But that's why we need to take action in every area, in things like reducing costs. We explained furlough. Furlough will probably save us around about £1 million, which will come back into the budget as an example. And reducing things in the centre to try and just save money this year when it isn't high priority. So there's two sides to that story. But the number is not unrealistic, but we will mitigate against it.
Sure. Thank you, Dave. Okay, that's helpful. John, let me just ask you, you may want to add further to that one, but I'd like you to pick up as well this question that many folks have asked, that often, you know, there is a sense that money is there, but it's tied up. For example, some congregations, big holdings in Consolidated Fabric Fund, desperate to use that money for running costs right now and for priorities right now, or more generally the reserves of the church. How are we going about freeing up some of that money centrally and locally for the needs of the church right now?
The one thing, two things I would have added to what Dave said just earlier. The first one is that the impact on Crossreach and the amount of support that Crossreach may need this year is a significant variable, and that's one of the ones that we're keeping our eye on as well. And it's one of the ones that we're prioritising because the care sector has taken such a terrible hit during this COVID-19 crisis. The other thing I would say too is that if this webinar had worked the way we really wanted it to work, Dave would have shown some slides, some pie charts, some graphs that would have actually shown the work we've done in this, the detailed work we've done in this. But we've been thwarted. We're just learning. So those are two small things. Well, one of them a very big thing. As to usable reserves, you know, the church probably has about 1 year's running costs that's stipends and salaries and mission related costs, in usable reserves that are not designated or restricted rather in other ways. And as you said, many congregations have got reserves of their own, but they feel frustrated because they're held for fabric or they're held for stipend only. There's very little movement allowed between these two. There is some movement, but there's legislative change required urgently for that kind of money to be released. And that's where we are going to have at some stage to have a General Assembly or a commission or some way in which we can tackle the required legislation to make it more possible to use reserves in a more flexible way.
Thank you, John. I could just give you a quick update on the poll for your information that we asked about buildings. I know it's a frustrating poll. It's not easy just to pick one or the other. But presently we've got this 18% of folks saying, can't wait to get back in ASAP. 44% of people saying, happy to wait until conditions are relaxed. I was meaning by that to when we could mostly meet as we normally do. And thirdly, 38% saying, I'm beginning to envisage church without the need for buildings. So interesting, and we'll keep you updated on that. Thank you too for your ongoing contributions in the chat. The chat will remain open for 10 or 15 minutes after the webinar for wash up and for final comments that you want to make. So thank you for that. John, I'm going to stick with you. I know it's not necessarily the remit of the Assembly trustees, but I've got to put it out here anyway because lots of people have been asking. And it's around the practice and procedure and the legislation framework that the church works with. Particularly people are being asking around about the vacancy procedure and so on. Various congregations are well in the process but are stymied at the moment. Others desperate to move on. But the legislation at present provokes so many questions. How are we to do that? Is there any sense that we're working on some relaxation or some creative responses so that we can work our way through what needs to be done for the ongoing life of the church?
Yeah, you're right, it's not my department anymore, but I understand that the Legal Questions Committee is working on a way of unlocking, especially for those congregations who've got to the point of a sole nominee, unlocking a way in which they can be inducted and allowed to start work. And they're hoping to bring some form of legislation to a commission, whether it's a virtual commission or a real one in September, was what I heard, but keep an eye on that space. I'd also say this, that I think there's a possibility here for us to be imaginative about how we get some people in place who are just at the moment stuck behind a piece of legislation. The legislation of the church has to serve the church, not get in its way. And so there may be ways, and I'm speaking off the top of my head, there may be ways in which someone might start work as a locum, but awaiting an opportunity to be inducted at a later stage. It's just a thought.
Folks, we're into the final 10 minutes. It's amazing how the time rushes by. So I'm coming back to another question that's come from the youth side of things, again from Tara, but I think it's important that we deal with this one as well. Again, I'll read what she said. At the 2019 General Assembly, it was agreed that there would be a focus on the under 40s. And then she says, but since the pandemic hit, all staff at 121 who deal with children, young people, etc., have been furloughed. I think she's suggesting there's mixed messages going on. How can we be prioritising our under 40s when we're doing this at the same time? And then Marlon Shedden, slightly different tack. She says that as she's been reviewing much of the material that's online from churches and by way of Sunday morning and so on, she's noticing that many are doing nothing by way of a children's slot, whatever that might be taken to mean. So there's a question here about children and youth. We have acknowledged it's so important, but how can we keep up with that in these present times? John, might you just make a quick response to that one too, please?
Marlon makes a good point. I've been surveying the online stuff that we've been doing as well, and not a lot of it is suitable for children, and yet the medium we're using is one where young people, even young children, are way ahead of me when it comes to using the technology. But we acknowledge that in order to be able to provide material that is interactive and useful for those for younger children, then we need to be able to find a way of releasing those talented, creative people who can produce the irresistible, watchable stuff. And that's one of the areas where I certainly believe we have to invest. The other part of the question was about how we are involving or reaching the under 40s. It's still very much a part of the Radical Action Plan, which Dave is building in now to the operational plan. And folk like me, believe me, are ready to vacate these seats in order for young people to come forward and lead the church. And I'm ready for that transition. And I think that what we've got to do with this at the end of this COVID thing is be intentional about that transition. This is giving us an opportunity to change a lot of things. And one of them must be the way in which we give a voice to young people and to younger generations. We've got specific plans that we're talking about in the trustees at the moment, but once again, we were thwarted from bringing these to the General Assembly.
That seat at the top table, and it takes us back to what someone said in the chat in relation to your metaphor about crossing the Jordan, that too involved a change of leadership to a new generation, and we want to watch that very closely as we go forward. Richard Baxter in Fort William, given our changed financial circumstances and the fact that there were never any resources to presbytery restructuring in the first place, wouldn't it be sensible to put that restructuring on the back burner for 2 years minimum, rather than trying to go ahead with no resources? And I've picked up that from other folk as well. I think folks may be sensing that right now, changing the structures of our presbyteries is a low priority, and we've got far more important things to deal with. Listen, I just want to ask, would one of you put your hand up? I'm not sure who I want to direct that question to. So if one of you wants to respond, I think we've got Raymond's hand up. So Neil, let's get Raymond live. Raymond, it's all yours.
I can't stress strongly enough the need for presbyteries to make these decisions if we want to move on about buildings. And I do not believe that on the whole, the small presbyteries we have are going to be able to make those decisions. One of the benefits we're seeing of the 3 new presbyteries that have been created, is that they can actually properly resource themselves to make proper decisions. And I think presbytery reform and creation of the new presbyteries is really a key part of the Radical Action Plan that mustn't be ditched.
Come on.
I was going to say that I think it's a fundamental pillar of the change process that we're going to have to go through to have the presbytery reform, and for us to be able to actually get closer to the local church and for the centre to function much, much better. The 12 presbytery system, I think, will be so much better. And the other thing, talking to George White about it, it feels like there's real momentum growing. It would be such a shame with the enthusiasm and momentum that we're actually creating now with it if we were to stop it. I can understand the comment made to start with, but I think it underpins a lot of what I want to do going forward, to be honest.
Okay, let me ask you another question, Dave. Let's stay right there then. I was going to say Raymond, but since you're live at the moment, folks are asking about 121. Listen, this has been around for long enough, long before you showed up, Dave, but it won't go away. This comes in from Curry Kirk, collectively, I guess. Could we have some transparency on the costs of running 121 in terms of staff, running costs, etc.? Is there a plan to move this costly piece of real estate to somewhere more cost efficient? Dave.
It is one of the strands of the Radical Action Plan. It's one of the ones that we'll be definitely taking forward. The only reason it's on hold at the minute is because we actually have this scenario that we're in where actually the building isn't worth what it was before the crisis. So we have to get through this, get value from it. But we have a plan. We have a business plan for moving. We could actually look, I think, without speaking out of turn, I don't think perhaps an even smaller building than we had planned before, because we've shown we can be very adaptable and fleet of foot with home working and other things now. So I think we could get a really good solution out of this. It is there, the actual figures, very, very visible if you wanted to see them. I could share them, certainly, but there's nothing hidden here. I think for the culture change that we want to get as well across the church, it will be a good thing for us to move. But notwithstanding that, actually, it's not all about buildings for culture. I think we're seeing a change already in the centre, just from the way we're trying to work better together. So yeah, it's definitely still part of the plan. And when we get through this next phase and look at what we're going to be shaped like for the future, then it'd be an ideal place to move. Thank you, Dave.
Folks, it is very nearly 12:30, and that is our allotted time. You know, I think we're on a roll. We could go for another half an hour, another hour for sure, but this is our time. And so I want to go back to what I said at the beginning. I'm sorry for those who will feel dissatisfied that we didn't get round to your particular question, or that we've not dipped into the subject matter deeply enough. And I'm sorry if you feel like that, but I reiterate that this is the beginning, and our conversation will continue. I know it frustrates some folk, but I personally have loved the chat box down the side. It kind of speaks to me of the Rayleigh Hall. It's what happens at General Assembly when people get together over a coffee, only what's been here for all of us to see. That's recorded, and we'll be able to pick up on much of that as we go on. So let me just ask John, Dave and Raymond, give us a final sentence, please. You haven't got a paragraph, you've got a sentence just as we bring things to a close. John.
I can't emphasise enough the restructuring of presbyteries and the revitalisation of presbytery planning is at the heart of what we have to do now.
Thank you, John. Raymond.
Words, because I think it's absolutely critical that presbyters are, that we are a Presbyterian church. We are not a congregational church which are driven by congregations, but we have a Presbyterian church to support congregations. But sometimes some of the things we're going to have to do are going to be difficult, but we will get through this, just like COVID-19, we'll get through this and we'll get to a better place.
Thank you, Raymond. And finally, Dave, parting shot.
I've just got huge optimism, Martin, for the future of the church after all we've been through in the last period and all the things we've managed to achieve in that time. I think the planning for the future is very, very manageable if we get it right. But the other thing is the fact that we've even been able to hold this today and we've managed to reach out to 1,000 people. Wow. I mean, what an honour to be able to do that and to get the feedback from everybody.
Thank you, Dave. Well, folks, this may be as near as I get to General Assembly, so would you all please tap your feet? Is that not the process we go to now? By way of just acknowledging the contributions we've had today from John and from Dave and from Raymond, and maybe a double tap of the feet for Neil McLennan and for Lynn and Karen, who have been behind the scenes handling all of the tech and the admin related to this day. The chat is going to stay open for a little while further, give you an opportunity just to say anything. And please watch this space. I am going to work hard with those folks and others to make sure we do more of this engagement, across the church, which is available to us as perhaps never before. But for now, we are going to bring things to a close, and I want to ask a blessing upon each of us gathered here in this webinar, and for our loved ones, for our nation, and for our church at this critical time for it. So may the grace of the Lord Jesus Christ, the love of God, and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be with you all now and forevermore. Amen. Folks, thank you for being part of it today. watch out when we put the next one up that you sign up nice and early and make sure you've got a space room at the table. Thank you so much, and goodbye for now. Thank you.